Blobcast. Free the period.
Hey, my name's Amber and I started my period when I was 11.
My name is Jo and I started my period when I was 14.
Fy enw yw Bethan a nes I dechrau fy misglwyf pan o'n i'n 12 mlwydd oed. My name is Bethan and I started my period when I was 12.
Hello, I'm Sophie and I started my period when I was 13.
My name is Danielle and I started my period when I was 12.
Hello and welcome to the Blobcast. Here at the Blobcast, we want to free the period. What does that mean? It means periods shouldn't cost us money. How do we even begin to achieve this? We think open conversations about periods are the start. Shame and stigma around bleeding and menstruation has ruled for too long. My name is Casey Robinson. I'm a period educator, and that means I go into schools and workplaces to talk about all things periods. I'm also a diversity and inclusion educator. In this limited series of the Blobcast, we'll be talking to some of my favourite activists, commentators and charities that work in this area. The one thing we all share is a passion for periods, a passion for open conversations. Many of you will have heard the term period poverty. We're not going to use that phrase here because research shows that people in that situation feel uncomfortable with it. We're going to use the phrase period equality, which is more than affordability. It's about awareness, understanding, and again, back to those open conversations. Today we're talking about period products and the cost. Do you know your menstrual cup from your CBD tampon? What are the pros and cons of different products? What about people that can't afford period products? And how badly has the cost of living crisis affected things?
The Blobcast, talking all things period.
My first guest today is Kenny Ethan Jones. He's an activist, campaigner, model, businessman and influencer. He's also the first trans man to appear in a period campaign. Kenny, welcome to the Blobcast.
Thank you.
My second guest is Terri Harris from Bloody Good Period. Bloody Good Period is the leading charity in the UK that aims to fight for menstrual equity. They deliver products to those who need them and aim to educate and normalise the conversation.
Yes, we bloody do.
I'm going to talk to you quickly about some facts, right? So we're going to set the scene today, I think. So these stats come from a WaterAid study that was called In the Red. So these stats say that 24% of people who menstruate in the UK say that all their family have struggled to afford period products in the last year.
Not surprising.
100% because of COVID, isn't it, as well?
Yeah, right?
Cost of living,
increased cost of
everything.
I reckon the number is higher.
So the number, we're saying 24% of people, but I'm always like, we could probably double it, right?
Also, how do you collect that data? Is it accessible for people who don't have access to the internet or laptops or whatever? You never know. But I feel like WaterAid did a good job at going far and wide with that data. Yeah,
for sure. So next stat is that 13% who currently have periods say it's likely that they will be unable to afford period products in the next 12 months.
Yeah,
so I guess
I think they'll probably agree with that still now. The next 12 months looks really scary for most people economically.
Going back to kind of quote-unquote normal life, do you know what I mean? So I reckon the number will probably be higher than that.
Now, yeah.
Yeah, numbers higher. And I think also as well because it's been changing so much, right? The changes, the cost of living is just consistently just going up and up, right? So we're saying 12 months, that's a pretty significant amount of time.
Now those energy bills have hit the doormat. Yeah.
We called it here today, guys.
I think about as well the fact that obviously people are more aware of what products they're using as well. And so maybe they won't want to use a cheaper product because it has bleach or something like that into it.
Yeah.
And so they might want a more expensive product. So actually, maybe they won't be able to afford it because of that in of itself.
Yeah, that's so true, right? What products are people using? Are we talking about the 99p pack that you get from your average supermarket? Or are you talking about something from Planet Organic, which is CBD infused and is
fancy business.
Is sewn together by angels. I don't know. But,
I love that. You need to put that on a packet.
You see the price of them, I'm well,
they better be.
It must be, innit? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I think when we talk about products, what are we talking about? Because there is a huge market out there, right? But as Terri has a wonderful box in front of us of products. Are we talking about the basic pads and tampons? Are we talking about cups? Are we talking about pants? What is behind that data that probably makes that number a lot bigger? So the next one is 61% said if period products were cheaper or if more free products were available, it would improve their mental health or well-being.
100%.
Yeah, definitely. Even for people who can afford period products, like everyone's been cut short. Like if you have a period, you've been out and been like, oh my God, I can't, like I've started, I haven't got a product. So just having them would really like release that stress and anxiety of having to like plan ahead, that like everyday stressor of having a period.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like on the, I mean, again, like mental health well-being, I'm not a doctor, and so I don't want to speak more to mental health, but I think in this idea of well-being, like, what does it actually mean not to have to think about this, right?
Yeah.
Like, do we actually know that yet? Like, we're really also talking about a world and a society and a community that doesn't exist yet, to be able to just walk out of your front door, go about your life, and if you do need a product, if you've just forgotten it, or X, Y, Z, that it's just there. Like, we have no idea what reducing that mental load looks like. Or maybe there's a few examples, a few companies that are maybe doing it, but like, could you say that every toilet you go into, you're going to be like met with the products that like want more life? No.
Absolutely not. It should be that way, but absolutely not today.
The Blobcast spoke to learners at Harlow College, Aaron, Alex, Kado, Sophie and Archie to find out their reaction to the cost of period products. Here's what they had to say.
Why are period products
so expensive?
Yeah,
but they're expensive.
Yeah.
It's like £5.
I thought they were free in the first place. I didn't even know that you have to pay for them. So me find out today, it was quite like, seems a bit weird.
I want to maybe ask you, Terri, a little bit more about like what, in terms of looking at these stats, in terms of what Bloody Good Period is doing, like what does that mean for you in like the day-to-day?
It just means like an increased demand for our services. The fact that the government doesn't take responsibility over providing free period products for everybody, but also for people in society who need it the most, means that that falls on us as a small charity. So I don't know the stats like specifically for this whole year, but previously in the year we had 150% increase in demand for our services. And we've also kind of increased who we're delivering to. So it's not just like food banks, refugee and asylum seeking communities anymore, but we're also getting requests from corporate companies and organisations whose employees and staff are experiencing in-work poverty, and they're finding it difficult to access period products. So I feel like the economic climate at the moment means just like more and more people are finding these essential items really difficult to access. And I think there's just not the government will or focus on like how we can move forward and really like support people's like mental well-being and period well-being.
For sure.
That's wild. I didn't think that it would seep into the corporate world. You know, that was never Bloody Good's period's original focus. So the idea that you've had to stretch yourself there must be such more of a demand on your side.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think the in-work poverty stuff is really interesting because it's also like seeping into the NHS as well. So there's like a lot of NHS workers that come to us and say, have you got free period supplies? And that's not the way that we work, but to see that like, you know, the people who have worked hardest throughout the pandemic, like even up till now, can't afford essential items while they're working or in their everyday life, I just think is outrageous. We did some research recently as part of, so it's like AI scoping, where they go into the internet and they pull out all of these different kind of, I guess, individual experiences across the internet. And one of the major things was that like periods are an everyday stressor, because every time you leave the house, wherever you are in your menstrual cycle, you're planning like, what if I come on? Will there be period products? What toilet can I use? If I use a menstrual cup, is there like an accessible toilet with a sink in it? All of these things that if you don't have a period, you're just not thinking about on a day-to-day basis. And so like that's an added mental load. Then you add on top of that poverty and like not being able to afford those products, and it's just so stressful.
Yeah, just kind of never ending. But then also this kind of stress that like sits there because, well, what's the solution to it? There isn't any other option, right? So it's almost something that you begin to normalise.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I guess like until you don't have that conversation, until I start having this conversation, you're just like, that's just life, right? Like you have to live it that way.
That was the biggest stress for me, you know.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie. Because I hated buying period products. Like, it was embarrassing. Like, it felt embarrassing. And also, it felt like a form of self-outing. Because obviously, where I wasn't so cis-passing in the beginning when I transitioned, I'd go to the period aisle and I would, like, I'd pick up a product. I didn't know what product, first of all. I would just pick up anything. Just
grab it.
Literally anything. I was like, yep, mine. Okay, cool. And then when I got to the till, I'd find myself overcompensating for the conversation, be like, it's for my girlfriend. I had no girlfriend. But just because I just wanted to make it very clear that these products are not for me, like I wanted to create distance.
Yeah.
And so already hating my period and what it made me feel like, and then being in a stressful situation, like I actually have to buy products right now. Otherwise, you know, in certain situations, I remember I used to use toilet roll, which is, you know, a lot of people in poverty, sorry for using that word, tend to have to do. And I was just, it's just not a nice experience. So it's like, if I could have a bathroom in which I could go into that nobody sees me using the product, it's just like a little bit of a safe haven for a trans person personally.
And now back to Harlow College to hear about how they support their trans learners.
Having the tote bags on the back of the doors really works. We have to put them in the accessible toilets because we have a number of learners who are transitioning. So they may be presenting their life as a man, living their life as a man, but still having periods. So they're in the accessibility toilet. And we do have gender neutral toilets as well, and there are bags in those areas, in the gender neutral toilets. And, you know, there's no judgment here at college. We have some fantastic conversations with some gender fluid young people, gender neutral young people, those that don't want to align to any gender or whatever, and how we can support them. Single cubicles is the way forward for those that are still not absolutely certain, and why should we make their life any more difficult? So, no, it works really well for us.
The idea of like the shame and the embarrassment and the stress is also like leading people into having to use things like sponges, socks, toilet roll, right? And like...
Yeah, and I think this toilet roll thing is so common. Like whenever we do data or I read data, it's like people are using toilet roll to absorb their period, which like has so many health implications. If you're doing that constantly, like the risk of infection, of like irritation, all of these things is huge. And we have just like normalised that as it being fine and a good way to absorb our period, when actually like we should be using period products and they should be available so that we don't have to use alternative things that can harm our bodies.
Yeah, I've heard of homeless people using like paper bags, brown paper bags, especially in America.
Yeah.
So there's loads of just like makeshift products that are not okay.
No, and like, and also as well, I think sometimes as well, we really abandon the idea that we're actually talking about our health when we're talking about periods.
Yeah.
Like somehow periods have just become, or I've always been this like little add-on thing that's like over there and not talking about it. It's a health issue. It's a health problem. Be that like your physical health or your mental health, right? Like we're talking about health all the time. This is a serious medical thing that we should be discussing. But because of that shame, stigma, taboo, all of this stuff, it's like...
Sounds about right.
It says here, I've got it written down that like the average spend on a period, Kenny, Terry, tell me if this feels right, wrong to you, is about £40 when you take in account all the products for like bleeding, potential pain products, and then maybe some like shocky Bix and things like that. Does that feel like a realistic number?
I feel like, is that part of the £4,800 a year or a lifetime number, or is that different? I don't know. £40, that feels right. So at the moment, we're working with some incredible UCL students to recost a period because we just felt like those numbers weren't accurate. And I think they're not accurate because they don't include things like time taken off work if you have a 0 hours contract, the extra money it costs to like run your kettle to fill your hot water bottle, to wash your leaked bedding and clothing. And so I think that stat feels accurate because it's much larger than like, I think I've heard like £12 or something before. But yeah, I think it's so varied as well because of people's individual experiences, but it's so much more than period products.
I'm even like thinking now as I'm speaking like how you would calculate it, right? Like all of the time that you say time lost, bits, the kind of things that you're dealing with.
That's why those whizzy UCL students are doing data analysis and not me.
Yeah, and I think as well it depends on how, you know, if you have endometriosis or something like that, you know, how much pain you're in, but also relate back to how much time off work you take and all of those different things. So I think that's going to be so individual.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. One thing in terms of the cost that I want to talk about as well is like, so what I hear a lot, a fair amount in these kind of conversations is where people will be like, oh, well, that person just needs to use a cup and then that's it, right? Like, or they just buy some period pants. And so I'm a big period pants fan. I have 5 pairs, okay?
Love that for you.
Right?
Yeah.
Which, again,
that's
sorry
funny.
if that sounds bougie, but like, try to live my best life. Well, but like, the idea is that just buy a pair of pants, just buy a cup, and then like, you're done. Which just it's a bit wrong, right?
Yeah, that is like one of the biggest conversations that kind of annoys me in this space because as a menstrual cup user, I see the like wonderful benefits of it, but it doesn't work for everybody. And we get so many people messaging us daily being like, why don't you just get everybody you work with a menstrual cup? And it doesn't take in factors cultural sensitivities. Not everyone wants to use an internal product. You got to be comfortable with your blood. Not everybody has that, like body dysmorphia, other reasons why you won't want to see your own blood. And then most of the people that we work with live in insecure, unstable housing. So they don't have access to like hot running water, gas and electric to like boil a cup. So it's a great solution for a lot of people, but it's not a great solution for everybody. And I think one of the things we're really passionate about is choice. And that's like a big conversation that we should always be having when we're talking about period products.
You said it so perfectly. I think the other thing that I would add is that all of these products, they have a lifetime as well.
Yeah.
So they don't last forever. So actually, we need to consider that. So it's like, I don't know, a cup may last, I don't know how long, let's just say 3 years, for instance.
Yeah.
You still don't have to consider the costing after those 3 years.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So it's not as easy as just going, okay, chuck a few people some period pants and some cups and we're great and we're sorted. It's not that easy, is it?
No. Yeah. Because then what happens, you get used to that product and you're like, this is incredible. And then after 3-10 years, however long it is, you don't have the finances to then rebuy that item, so you're back to using something that you don't want to use. You almost take away choice from people by giving them something.
Yeah, for sure. Also, the idea is that we're really raised with this idea that there is a choice. So like even if we're taking the affordability factor out, which is a huge part of this conversation, right? So even if you have the money to buy a cup and buy pants, how often do you like experiment with products, right? Like how many of us actually, you know, if you wanted to buy a white jumper, you would go out and you would probably go out and try on 5 to 6 white jumpers until you decide the one that you want. You don't do that with period products, but it's something that you're putting in like one of the most intimate areas of your body, like every month, give or take, really a lot. But we don't shop for them. Like, you know, Kelly's example, like grab and run, right? Like there is
First one.
First one, just like there.
That'll
let
do.
me get this over and done with, right? I don't want to be here. So like how the lack of conversation around it means that we don't think, actually, is this the right product for me, right?
And that's another issue with the menstrual cup, because it's not a one size fits all. Like me personally, and I feel really privileged and lucky to say this, I've had to go through 6 or 7 different types of menstrual cup to find one that fits my short cervix and my heavy flow. And it's like, what a combination.
That was on the box, short cervix, heavy.
It's not. So yeah, you have to keep testing these out, and like that's not a luxury that many people can afford. So the reusable products are a bit trial and error, and you have to find the right fit for your body, which can be like expensive and time consuming. You don't want to leak, so then there's that added worry as well.
It's also about the education of the products, because like if you don't know how long you should keep a tampon in, you don't know how long you should wear period underwear. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You also need to know that, and I feel like there's more people have a baseline when it comes to like knowing pads and like basic tampons more than they do kind of the newer products, because we're still kind of figuring them out as time goes on. So I think it's also that it's like me personally, if I had a period today, I'd probably just stick to what I'm comfortable with, because I'd be too ashamed to have that conversation with somebody around, you know, how often should I change my period underwear? Do you see what I'm saying? So I think there's also that as well. Yeah,
for sure. Just the unknown, right? Because we're just not talking about it, not seeing it. We're only just seeing like fake red blood on the TV, right? So,
not the blue blood. Not the blue blood.
Not the royal blood.
I think as well there needs to be a big thought around distribution and ways to give people product in privacy, I would say.
Okay.
So I think that's what it is. It's the shame of, I think I always go back to, I think it's the shame of having to ask for the products.
Yeah.
Versus if you were able to take out will with nobody watching, I think loads of people would use that. But it's a case of how do you set that up? Do you know what I mean? Because I don't know when it's happened, but a few years ago I remember like in schools, specifically in America, they were like the boxes, dispensers boxes that you could just go into the bathrooms and take.
Yeah.
And I feel like that was quite a clever idea, but I'd never seen it kind of translate over to here in the UK. Not sure why not.
Yeah, you need the government backing for that. Like I was recently in Australia, and there's an organisation there, Share the Dignity, and they have set up these kind of period product machines, like vending machines in toilets, which are great.
They sound fun.
Yeah, they're so cool. I was there, like pushing the buttons and seeing what happens. But it's amazing because that just exactly what you're saying. People have like free access. It's private and it's like shame free, and there's no barrier to asking. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, that's what it is. It goes back to what you were saying in the schools. You know, if I'm a teenager and I'm in a school and I've come on my period, I have to then ask my teacher, can I have period products? Like, depending on how comfortable you are on having that conversation, you're probably not going to.
That's why there was a Girl Guiding report recently into the school's product scheme, and I think it was something like 30% of young people hadn't accessed the scheme because they were embarrassed to ask their teacher. 46% hadn't accessed the scheme at all, but 30% because they were too embarrassed to ask their teacher. Because there's a block, you know, you have to go to reception and ask Miss, I started my period, can I have some products? Which is so embarrassing.
The more barriers to entry, do you know what I mean, you keep, the harder it's going to be. And most people aren't comfortable with having conversations about periods. So it's like any system that's in place, you need to think about how are you going to strip back as many barriers as possible.
Yeah, I was reading this yesterday as well, Emma Barnett's book, and she was talking about how there was examples of some kids in schools who were, the teachers felt that they were intentionally kicking off inside the class and causing trouble, so they'd get taken out so that they could then use that opportunity to say, can I get a product?
Wow.
Like, can I have a pad? Can I have a tampon?
Essentially getting in trouble so that they can have the privacy.
Exactly, right. So like that was their attempt at removing that barrier themselves, you know. And then even loads of times in some of the schools I've been, a lot of the young girls specifically are like, I obviously like maybe in the middle of the class realise I need to go, or like I need to change my tampon or my pad or whatever. But then like when I'll go and do that, I'll ask the teacher, like, can I go to the toilet? Can I go to the loo? And then I'll pick up my bag to go. And then the teacher's like, where are you going with your bag? What are you doing with your bag? And it's like, I just need to go with my bag.
Mind your business.
Like, but also like in front of the whole class, right? And in the sense of like, I understand that there is XYZ things going on. Like, I don't want to speak for teachers and the things that they have to deal with each and every day. But the reality of it is that essentially, most of the time, it's not like a malicious intent that they're like, how dare you take your bag, you're going to cause trouble. But the idea is that it doesn't even occur to them as a thought that might be why that person doesn't want to take a pad or a tampon or a product out of their bag and walk through the middle of the class with it.
You know, I'm thinking about in the situation that you're explaining, and I think about, I went to an all-girls school, and so what I think about is I remember like specifically what you're saying about some of the girls I was in class with not being able to pick up their bag. So what they would do, get a tampon, hide it up their sleeve, and that causes the shame even more because it's like you have to hide what you're doing. And no one's walking out tampon in hand, heading to the toilet. Do you know what I'm saying? Bye babes. Do you know what I'm saying? Most people won't do that. So it's like, exactly, I think as well, I don't know if this is the right thing to say, but I think it's about letting the kids be, just trusting them.
Also, I think like, even if they're allowed to go to the toilet, I've worked with so many young people where they're not allowed to use the toilet during class, so they like bleed through, they are like nervous the whole time that they're going to leak. Like that takes so much. You're like rubbing the chair, make sure you don't have any blood on it. Like that takes so much focus away from your education. Like I think there's a bigger conversation about trust as well.
One of the things that like I always feel that people come back as a rebuttal, maybe more in like workplaces, right? But also in schools, is that like we can't have free products because people will quote unquote abuse it. Abuse the fact that they're there. This idea that if we put a box of tampons or a box of pads, that they'll suddenly take like 20 and then they'll be gone all of a sudden. And so, I mean, I would say sort of anecdotally, like things that I've heard and seen is the idea that that does actually happen, right? Like that is a very real reality, but like, we're not asking why. Why does that happen? Because of the fact that they're so inaccessible. Because of the fact that people are like, oh my gosh, this is going to run out. I've got to grab and go. You know, we use that phrase again. Just grab and go, right? Because I don't know if this is ever going to happen. And so, like, often what you see is it takes about 4 months to build up that trust with students, with your staff teams, that will always be there.
It's a bit like pasta during COVID. Do you remember when everyone went nuts for pasta? And then when it was, and toilet roll. So when it was there, it went so quickly because everybody was so worried that it wouldn't be there again. I think it's the same for period products in schools and workplaces. You're like, wow, I'm finally being catered for. Quick. Yeah.
Like, let me get my rights real quick. Let me just
let me get my work.
The Blobcast. Free the period. The Blobcast wanted to find out more about how free period products are distributed in schools and colleges and how students feel about the cost of products. We went to Harlow College in Essex to speak to learners and staff. First up is Marion Hollingsworth, Harlow College's Safeguarding Trust Manager, who spends the budget for free period products and distributes them across the school. At the college, tote bags filled with period products are hung on the back of toilet cubicle doors so learners can access them whenever they need them.
So we found out that the government were going to provide free sanitary products for students, so we jumped on that bandwagon. We now get somewhere in the region of £6,500–7,000 a year. We spend every single penny, and we buy sanitary towels, tampons, moon cups and reusables. We have this time round got the period pants. Obviously they're really expensive in the shops and they're not cheap for us either. So quite how we're going to distribute them, we're discussing at the moment, because if we put them all in one toilet, they would just go and that would be it. We're not quite sure how we're going to distribute that. Having the tote bags on the back of the doors really works. And I go around every Monday morning and top them all up. We have our own food bank here because we have a huge number of learners. In fact, I've got over 100 learners in care. I have got over 80 unaccompanied asylum seekers, some of whom are female. So their only source of income could be the very, very little that they get from social care. And we're constantly doing food donations. We have an emergency bursary fund. There is huge financial hardship outside. A lot of staff, I hear them saying that their charge up their college iPads and their mobile phones when they're here at college, just to save that little tiny bit of electricity. Yeah, it's everywhere. It is absolutely everywhere.
Back to Harlow College, where we spoke to Marion and some of the students there about their thoughts on reusable period products.
We've found that what our most popular products are and what doesn't work. The reusable sanitary towels, sanitary pads, hugely popular, can't keep up. I could give out those all day, every day, but then that would mean we'd have no budget for sanitary towels and tampons going on. I've been working with a couple of young ladies who are my little guinea pigs, and they've been using the reusable pads for a year, and the same batch, they've used them every month. So they seem to work really, really well for them. Got a lady that is menopausal that quite simply can bleed for England, and they come with a little pouch as well, so you've got your used side and your clean side, and she has a couple of those. She can get through 5 a day, and that would cost her so much money. She's a member of staff, but she's struggling financially. More than happy to help her. Why wouldn't we help her? She's in education, very, very valued member of staff, so she's able to manage that. She's a very eco-conscious person, so she washes them, she soaks them overnight, washes them, boom, lovely.
I love the idea of like a menstrual cup that you can wash and reuse, but again, like, it's not going to work for everyone. People are pushing, like, if you're not using reusable products, then
you're killing the environment.
Yeah. And I completely understand that. That's a different story.
But not everyone
like,
can.
It's not going to work for everyone. Not everyone can do that. For some people with heavy flows, if you use a cup, it's just going to sit in there.
Personally, I don't use reusable products, but I'm also just like I'm too scared to even use tampons. Like the times I've tried, we were having this conversation. But like I've tried tampons a few times. I just can't do it. Like I don't know what
there is like I have to use them though. That's the thing.
Use them, but obviously we don't know how to
we
do
aren't
that.
We aren't taught it.
It's just like getting them and like, obviously getting used to it. But like it's kind of like a grind, really.
Yeah.
Thanks to everybody at Harlow College for letting us talk to them about all things period.
We are sponsored by PHS. PHS supplies schools with period products which are free for any and all learners who need them, whenever they need them. No questions asked.
I feel like this is like the big juxtaposition. It's like nobody wants to see people leak or bleed because society tells us that's gross and disgusting. But on the other side, we don't want to give people free period products. It's not seen as like essential. And so it's like, how can it both be gross and disgusting, yet you're not willing to like cater to support people in like dealing with that? I just find that so bizarre.
I want to ask you, Kenny, about like using products as a trans man. How do you feel that like the, I would say, development or like the increase in products on the market has taken that into consideration? Like, is there a real inclusive centre for this?
There's so much to say here.
Okay, everyone take a seat.
So you might have to work into it.
Okay.
Literally. I think the first thing to start with is probably like the advertising of products. So I think the first thing that I started to recognise back in 2018 was that, first of all, trans men, non-binary people, gender fluid, no part of the conversation at all. Like gender inclusive language was like starting to be used by the Good Period. Big up. One of the charities that I noticed that started using it first.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of like the first change. I would say the second change was products being marketed towards trans people that actually weren't made for trans people.
Okay.
And my thought behind this is that, like, obviously when period underwear, specifically period underwear, was made, it was based on women bodies, like feminine bodies. And the issue that I have with that when I've tried period underwear specifically is that it emphasizes hips, which is probably one of the most, like, things that make trans people the most dysphoric.
Sure.
And so actually, these brands, like, instead of creating a product that's specifically for trans men, have basically marketed boy shorts as suitable for trans people, but the shape and figuration that it gives you when you wear it is not comfortable. Yeah, and so that was kind of like one of the biggest issues that I see, and that's why I'm starting my own period underwear company specifically for trans.
You heard it here first, people. You heard it here first.
So I've just got tired of like seeing this space in the market because I feel like there has been lots of development specifically for women, and it's wonderful. But when it comes to trans men, non-binary people, I just feel like it's kind of fallen short. As well, I think, going back to like what you said earlier about Buddy Period, giving people options to choose what products they want as well, because a lot of trans people, I don't want to use a tampon. I've used a tampon once in my life and I hated every second of it, and I was like, I'm absolutely not doing this again. And so stuck with pads, but pads just, I didn't necessarily like how they felt. And so when period underwear came around, I was like, oh, this is a great time. Like, who made this? This is fantastic. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And being able to wash it and just know that it's always there as well. Do you know what I mean? That safety of going, oh, I just have to wash it, but I know them there, versus I have to go to the shop and going through that stage of like being embarrassed to buy a product.
Yeah. Terri, I want to ask you, in terms of when people come to you to kind of access products or like use products, do you feel like they're being catered to? Can you cater to them?
What's interesting is period pants have become really popular, but they've only become really popular because we've been doing education sessions about them. So people need to learn and understand what these products are and how to use them. Pants are so great because they're like a really accessible, reusable. You don't really have to learn how to use them like you do with the other ones. You just wear a pair of pants, take them off, wash them. And I think that's so great for a lot of the people that we work with. We used to get a lot of tampon donations and people just don't use them. In a lot of countries that are people's home countries, like the word for period product is a big brand of pads. So they'll call it by like the brand product name of a pad. Yeah. And so that's just like what is most commonplace to them. And using a tampon perhaps doesn't fit with like religious understandings of, especially in a lot of communities, the hymen is a big thing, and whilst I understand that that is a social construct and like a misogynistic myth around virginity, like for a lot of people that is a really strong cultural thing. And so using internal products like tampons, which people don't want to use them in case it breaks the hymen or takes their virginity. So pads are kind of a more wanted product.
I mean, I hate this term, but like the cultural sensitivity issue, right? Like, which to me brings up this idea that somehow certain cultures are more sensitive than others, which like ain't the case, right? And so it's framed in a very like power dynamic way. But like the idea is that, and I think a lot of times in schools particularly, and people will say, or actually even in workplaces, like how do we have this conversation without offending people, without insulting people? Like you said, that you can understand that there is misogyny behind this, sexism behind these ideas, but that doesn't mean that people still don't get to like be authentic in their religious beliefs, in their understanding, their cultural norms. So I think that speaks to a lot that you can do this conversation, and sometimes people avoid it because they're like, oh, well, you know, that person says this and this group think that. And it's like, actually, you know, as I said before, like when I'm showing the products to the kids and they are quite literally alarmed at the size of a menstrual cup, like they're like, you want me to put that where?
It's so big.
It is so big.
It is scary, isn't it?
We show it like on the board, like there's a PowerPoint, and then they're like, but like, well, how big is it in real life? I'm like, oh, it's much smaller. And then I get out and they're like, that's the same size. That's too big. So it's just, and so I think like the idea that like the same question is like, when I'm 14, do I have to start using tampons? And like, absolutely no. You just need to be informed that like that's an option for you. However, you can discuss that with your family. You can discuss that with your carers, with a trusted adult to understand what's right for you. Exactly. The whole point of having the choice there is that you can choose. I just want you to know what's available. This is not that this is better, this is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad. There's no like binary in any of it. It's just that it is out there and we should be aware of it, even if it isn't right for us.
And I think that choice thing is so important. I feel like a lot of things that happen in the charity sector is you make assumptions about certain communities, like you can't deliver menstrual cups to that community because they believe in like the hymen and like the importance of that, so they would never use a menstrual cup. But like you have taken agency from that community, allow them to make the choice. If you teach people about the different options available to them, let them make that choice. If at the end of the day they don't want to use that internal product because it might break or they believe it will break the hymen, that's totally fine, and like allow them to do that, but don't take that option away from them because you've made an assumption.
Right.
Yeah.
100%. Going back to the education bit, right? And we'll do this together. You've got the products in front of you. Maybe do a bit of a show and tell.
Yeah, I love a show and tell.
And so, yeah, just showing people like how squidgy it is, flexible it is. I think people will...
Yeah, so obviously it's like very flexible and can like be moved around. There's loads of different ways that you can fold it, and you just have to kind of get used to the one that's best for you and your body. I like to play the game of like, what does this look like? A lot of people think it looks like a bell.
Yeah, ding-a-ling.
A nipple.
I think it looks like that thing that you put in your head in the hairdresser.
For your highlighter. Yeah, I love that. So it looks like lots of different things, but yeah, basically you insert it into the vagina, and then when you need to take it out, it's not a plunger, so you don't just like pull this thing because you will pull out your...
You cut that as well, right? Like that it's a long length, and then you decide how long you want it to be. That's the one thing
exactly.
I learned,
it's kind of like a tampon string, so you're just using this to find where it is in the body, and then you're going to squeeze this bottom bit and pull it out, and there's like these tiny tiny little holes all around, and it basically vacuum seals it, so it holds it into the vagina, and then when you push this, it releases that. Then you just tip it out, rinse it, reuse it, and then at the end of your period, boil it. And it lasts for like 10 years, depending on the brand.
Okay.
Not for everyone. People get grossed out by their blood. Totally get that. Maybe you don't want to use that.
Yeah, and I think another key point to add in is like the usability time, right? So we've talked about that. Usually it's like we have a general understanding with pads and tampons because they've been around the longest. But I know that people are always like, well, if I take it out, like I can't boil it because I'm at school or at work. But like the idea is you can leave it in all day.
Yeah. It depending on your flow, like you can leave it in for 8 hours. It also depending on the brands, and yeah, some people, this is accessibility thing is a massive thing, because if you don't have a sink in the toilet that you're using, this becomes very difficult to use, because if you take it out, you need to rinse it. So some people carry like a mini bottle of water around with them so they can just like rinse it. But it's a bit of a faff, you know? It's not as easy as just like
when you said mini bottle of water, I'm already
Because she was like, no, I'm out.
I'm already out, but I was like,
Definitely.
I need to take a what?
Too much planning.
Your bag becomes
like a
too
little
big.
lunchbox, and then they've got like a little like a hot stove where they boil it. No. Okay. Anyway,
All I'm imagining is like you in a teeny playhouse, just like cleaning your period products.
What about now? Let's look at some pants.
Okay, so these are some of the pants that we provide, and I just like love these. Most people love them because they're just like really easy to use. You just pop them on like your underwear, and they have this like amazing internal lining which you can't feel or because you're on camera.
And it's also not as thick as people I think it is. I know a lot of people assume it's like a big like thick bit of material, but actually it's just...
These ones are like super thin, and like this is like some incredible technology that I don't really understand, but the blood doesn't sit on the top.
Oh yeah,
I would
love that. Okay.
I actually know that part. I know that part.
Please.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know everything, but obviously I had to do research. So the first thing to talk about is obviously that when it comes to the absorbency, there's different levels depending on the brand.
Yeah.
So some of them do like really light flow, heavy flow. So, you know, I guess again it comes down to trial and error of which like how heavy you are. Some people tend to use them as a backup. Yep. So if you have a tampon and you just want like make sure that you don't leak anywhere, that's also an option. And the technology in most of these are quite basic. So it's just like a cotton. There's like basically like a vegan leather or something of that form in between that stops it from leaking down.
Okay.
And then there's a layer in between that holds the blood, which is like kind of like a thin cotton. So imagine cotton. That's what touches you here, and then cotton in between, and then a leather of some form, and then the back of the underwear.
Wow. That is way less techie than I thought it was.
I was like,
it was the hydrocolononic acid
molecules.
It's like there's going to be some big science words.
No, it's not. It's just about using the right fabrics that obviously don't cause infection and things like that. So like organic cottons and things of that form. So it's just making sure that but it's not a lot of absorbency. So that's another thing to bear in mind. So if you're a heavy bleeder, period underwear might not be the right product for you.
Okay. Good to know.
Yeah.
Good.
Sorry, I just took away from your showcase there.
I loved it.
No, it's sharing and caring.
The most knowledgeable should definitely talk about it.
You know, I've been at home cutting period underwear. Like, what's inside of it?
I've learned a lot. I'm going to take that to my next lesson.
I feel like tampons. Like applicator versus non-applicator?
So this is like for heavier absorbency, and this one is a lighter one with an applicator. I feel like the most important thing to know is that like with every period product, it's really important to like wash your hands, but especially with tampons, because toxic shock syndrome is this really like bad infection that can like happen sometimes when bacteria from the outside of our body gets in. If you leave a tampon, you're allowing that bacteria to build up, and sometimes it can lead to like death. So it's really important that we're like washing our hands and taking our tampons out when they're supposed to be. But just like the moon cup, inserted internally. A lot of people prefer using applicator tampons because it just kind of helps with ease. So with an applicator tampon, you kind of want to get this whole top bit inside the vagina, and then you use this kind of like a syringe to kind of push it up and inside.
Yeah.
And then the string helps you pull it out, and that's kind of the bare basics.
Yeah, I think those are two things that always stand out to me with applicator tampons is one, I remember reading, I forget whose book it was in, that like applicators were just literally invented because no one wanted to touch themselves, essentially, right? And I know a lot of European countries like don't have applicator tampons. It's a very quite UK, US thing of we don't touch
down there.
And then the second thing is also the question that always comes is a lot of the kids will always be like, will the string come out?
Come out.
Yeah. Which is where my sewn by angels comes. Because like, so when the angels sew it, it's like right up in there.
It's really not going to come out.
Good point to touch on actually as well is about from YouTube's experience, because I'd used one once and that was it. How does it feel once it's inside?
I feel like that's such an important part of it. Like, you shouldn't be able to feel it when it's inside. And if you can feel it, then either you're using the wrong absorbency or you haven't pushed it in far enough. So really important that if you can feel it when it's inside, that you take it out and try again. And again, like with every period product, it's trial and error. It's not going to be like a one time I've absolutely smashed it. Like, going to have to try again and again probably. Yeah. But I feel like that's why applicators are sometimes good, because if you get that top bit inside the vagina and push, the tampon will be in the right place.
Yeah, for sure. I think another thing which I feel like people talk about a lot less, maybe it's just something that like people have forgotten or it isn't a thing anymore, but I remember when I was at school and the teachers were saying like you shouldn't put a tampon in like if you haven't got your period. Like that is cut into, because it is of a very high absorbency. Yeah. And so the idea that sometimes people were putting tampons in like the day before their period was coming or something, or just there because they felt like it was better because they didn't want anything happening like in their underwear, but actually it's not really very good for you to have a tampon in if you were not bleeding.
I feel like we could do a whole other podcast about discharge and the like shame and stigma around it, but like I've spoken to young people who have used tampons to like absorb their discharge, and I just like really need to make this point that like discharge is like natural and important and it's how the vagina cleans itself. So don't use tampons for doing that, because you just make your discharge worse. You're going to get thrush or BV or something else that's going to irritate and feel awful.
BV, for those who don't know what it is?
Bacterial vaginosis, sorry.
Come on.
Look at us just with all of like, the little letters and the slang names.
Abbreviations.
I think another thing when it comes to tampons as well is that some of the applicators you can get that are reusable, right, with certain brands. So if you're conscious about that.
Environment. And I feel like there's just so many options with like tampons and period products now, like organic, made from like coconut leaves. Like, I don't know.
You can also get tampons that are infused with CBD.
Yes. I am a big fan of those. Yes. I am not a fan of tampons, but I am a big fan of CBD, and I've never actually suffered that badly with like menstrual cramps, but I quite literally have nothing, to the point I forget I'm on my period.
Wow.
Well, I think it goes back also to that conversation we were having earlier about when we were talking about the cost of how much it costs just including your period. So like, I don't know, like paracetamol or something like that. This kind of like helps to bridge that gap as well. So if you're trying to spend less money, essentially, maybe that's a good choice.
Yeah, good in between. Yeah. Absorb and pain relief at the same time.
Can't be mad about that.
No. I mean, they are expensive. They're pretty expensive.
I think it's because they're new. Yeah, I think once they kind of go to the market a bit more, the cost would reduce.
Yeah, I mean, even though like the oil or the balm in and of itself, like it's not cheap, right? But I think for me personally, they work great because I've never had to like, I don't have endometriosis or PCOS. I've never had to like suffer with them, but they do like bother me a little bit sometimes. And so the idea that I can like have that relief, for me, that makes sense, but I can afford it. So that's a whole different conversation. But I would hope that one day they would be more mainstream.
Yeah.
Is that a word?
I reckon it will. It's just like CBD in of itself is like just coming into light. So I reckon over time as well. And, you know, as more research comes out with more health benefits, I reckon, it will become more popular.
Absolutely.
Great. So I know that a fair few times when you're like working in schools, when there are young students who already say that they identify as trans, or they are maybe confused about what they identify as, they recognise that they're going through some difficulty around that, they're not having the conversations they need to. And a lot of the time teachers are just a little bit stuck. Like when you're in a lesson or in having a conversation, or if, you know, doing those workshops and hopefully opening up these conversations, how can we make sure that teachers, educators, parents, carers are doing that without putting too much pressure or possibly forcing them through that feeling of being outed?
It's hard because, like, with my experience, my mum was such an incredible mum, and she left out that period conversation with me. And I feel like she left it out not because she didn't want me to know, but because she was scared that she was going to make me feel invalid in my gender by saying it. Because back that kind of, like, I've been transitioning for what, like 11 years? Do you know what I mean? No, I'm lying, longer than that, like 17, sorry. I'm talking about medically. So I feel like, you know, having conversations, just talking about periods. Do you know, in the same way that you should talk about them with cis men so that they're educated as well.
For sure.
I think just, and, you know, going back to language, gender inclusive language, showing them resources of other trans people and non-binary people who bleed as well. Because I think a lot of it is the shame of like, I felt like I was the only one who was experiencing this.
Yeah.
But that's back in a day and age where there wasn't so many trans people. And so now there are a lot more visual trans people. So I think as a parent, I think it's just about normalising the conversations at home, not linking it to anything of like womanhood or pregnancy or anything like that. I just think just making it this thing. It's a bodily function. It's very normal. It happens to people who have vaginas and that's just what it is. And I think, you know, in terms of like products, I think the thing that helped me back in the day was like using one of the products online. So buying the products online, getting it shipped at home so that I have that kind of like privacy and protection from it, or asking my big sister or begging her, like go to the shop because I don't want to go and embarrass myself. But hopefully that, you know, I hope that a young trans person or non-binary person doesn't feel embarrassed by the product. Do you know what I mean? That's what I hope. I talk about periods a lot on my Instagram page, but the thing I want to say as a young trans person, if you do start to have small bleeding, it's not unusual. Okay. Definitely go to your GP if it's happening frequently, because it might just be that your testosterone levels are off and that you might need a higher dose of T, or, you know, there might be other health implications. So always just double check. But yeah, ultimately, when you're on T, stop your periods.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have come to the end of Grab and Go. I just want to say absolute huge, massive thank you to Terri and Kenny for being here today. Highly encourage you to follow both Bloody Good Period and Kenny on Instagram. There are an enormous amount of resources on Instagram, which I think maybe people don't understand, and I think it can be a really great way to start to help you normalise the topic for yourself. So already 2 great follows for you there. So today we've had a conversation about cost and products, and we've scratched the surface, but I feel like we've had some good chat, but this could have gone on. We kept to it, and so I just want to say a huge thank you, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you for having me.
Bye.
My name is Terri Harris, and I started my period when I was 11.
My name's Kenny Jones, and I had my first period when I was 15.
Thank you for listening to the Blobcast, where open conversations are our thing. Now, we want you to do the same in everyday life. Tell people that you're on your period, talk about your bleeding, and don't hide your period products. The more you talk, the more shame and stigma can be broken down. And the more that happens, the more we can free the period. We are sponsored by PHS. PHS supplies schools with period products which are free for any and all learners who need them, whenever they need them. No questions asked.
If you're a teacher or a student listening to this, you can find downloadable resources on the PHS website. The link is in our episode description. Don't forget to follow us on our social channels. Just search for the Blobcast.